This is just going to be a rant about the Ohio State-Michigan game from an Ohio State fan. It's been a few days, needed to decompress, needed to soak in the loss. Rough week for sure to be a Buckeye fan. And unfortunately, I got to see what might be the most embarrassing and the worst loss Ohio State has ever taken in the history of this rivalry. So I'm getting this up later this week than normal, but I needed to process this and think about this big picture. And this is just going to be a rant. So join me if you want. I can't believe the game plan for Ohio State's offense was just to run the ball up the middle into the strength of Michigan's defense, which is their interior defensive line. Defensive tackles Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham are the best players on that Michigan defense. I mean, Will Johnson didn't play. He's a very good player. I get that. That's even worse. Colston Loveland and Will Johnson didn't even play. Anyways, that interior defensive line for Michigan was the strength of their defense. And Ohio State's offensive line to start the year was solid, but has no depth. They've missed in recruiting, etc. And then they lose their best offensive lineman, their center, Seth McLaughlin. They lose their left tackle before that, Josh Simmons. So now the offensive line is kind of a weak link. And you want to run the ball up the middle through your weak link into the strength of Michigan's defense. Over and over and over. Inside zone, they were averaging 2 yards a carry or something like that. May have even been less than that. But that was the game plan for Ohio State. And look, I'm fine if they want to run the football. That's fine. You look at what they did against Penn State. They were getting Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson out on the edges, right? That fake read option, freeze the edge, then quick pitch out to Quinshon. They did that against Michigan once, and it went for an easy 15 yards, and then you don't see it again. What happened to that? It worked against Penn State 1,000 times. It worked when you did it against Michigan, and then you just go away from it. And Ryan Day with the run game, after the game, always talks about, and he's talked about this earlier the year, years previously, he talks about establishing the run game, establishing the ground game. Your team is not built to establish the run. You went out and got a running quarterback, Will Howard, or I should say a quarterback that can run. You have the best running back duo in the country, but your offensive line is not built to run the football. Sorry, it's not good enough. You have the best receivers in the country. You have 5-star, 5-star, 5-star. You get Jeremiah Smith, who, even as a true freshman, might be the best receiver in the country. At the very least, is one of the best receivers in the country, has nearly 1,000 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns on the year. He didn't have a single target in the second half of this game. You build your team to be kind of a 7-on-7 team. Yes, you want a quarterback that can run the ball a little bit. You have great running backs, but your team is not built to be this smash mouth, run the ball up the middle, down your throat. That's not what you are, Ryan Day, in Ohio State. And that's what they wanted to be. So that's the concern going into this game is, well, Michigan has a pretty good defensive line, but there's no way Ohio State's just going to play their game. Wrong. That's exactly what they did. In Ryan Day's thing of establishing the run game first before you just start airing it out, I just don't get it. If you are setting your team up to throw the ball and you have talent on the outside, use your talent. Throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith. Not having a single target to Jeremiah Smith in the second half of this game is inexcusable. He was unguardable. Even with Will Johnson there, I'm taking Jeremiah Smith all day. But Will didn't play. The secondary could not guard Jeremiah Smith. He drew 2 pass interference penalties in the first half and then had a touchdown soon after that. And then you don't target him at all in the second half of that game. I'm laughing because it's ridiculous saying this out loud. What a failure this was from Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and the offensive staff. Complete failure. Will Howard wasn't good enough. Had 2 picks. Your field goal kicker, Jaden Fielding, missed 2 gimme kicks. Meanwhile, Michigan's kicker is making kicks from 50 plus. That's a difference in the game as well. You can't be missing kicks like that. Ohio State never wins the margins, right? A tight game, a game like this, even though it shouldn't be tight, they don't win the margins. And another thing that's so frustrating with Ryan Day that you can see from time to time, he's not a horrible game manager. He's not horrible at clock management, but at times things pop up and you go, what the hell are you doing? At the end of this game, right? Michigan's driving down the field. I think Ohio State takes a timeout. Timeout's up. We're back on the field. Ohio State had, 12 men on the field. Ryan Day tries to take a timeout again, but you can't take consecutive timeouts. It's a penalty, and this just extends Michigan's drive, first down, and now you're looking at what is essentially the end of the game. That can't happen. You cannot have a penalty like that after taking a timeout. And I understand part of their explanation, if you will, or excuse, whatever, is that they're trying to look at what Michigan's personnel is coming out of that timeout, coming out of that huddle, which is going to dictate whether or not they're going to go base with their linebacker or bring in the nickel. I get that. But you have to be ready to go with both guys coming out of that timeout. And that's a quick turnaround. But just to not have the ability to understand that, and then to not have the ability to understand you can't call consecutive timeouts, I mean, it drives me crazy. And this is the end of the fourth in a tight game. You cannot be giving away yards and first downs like that. Those are the things that worry me the most. Like, yes, the horrible game plan sucks, but it's just the head coach not being able to win the margins and just coming up with boneheaded stuff and not being able to have your team ready to play and having stupid penalties coming out of timeout. You absolutely cannot have that if you're Ryan Day. And that's kind of what Ryan Day does from time to time. Things happen and you ask yourself a question, how can you let that happen? Ryan Day took the CEO role this year so this exact thing wouldn't happen. This is the first year where he gave up play calling duties, right? He has Chip Kelly, all of his trust into Chip. He's known Chip for a long time, worked with Chip. He's the play caller. You give the reins to him. I'm going to be the CEO guy. Got it. Your defense, you have Jim Knowles. He says Jim Knowles is the head coach of his defense. So you have your guys. Ryan Day is now the CEO. So he can spend his time better elsewhere during the week. In the offseason, he's not always in the offensive preparation room because he's not the play caller. But also on the field, you have to have a sense for moments in games, right? You call a good timeout. You sense a fake punt is coming. You have your personnel ready to go, whatever. This all comes back to the margins, and Ryan Day just can't do that right now as a head coach. So that's concerning. The CEO thing just hasn't worked this year for Ryan Day. I don't know. It's not a good feeling, and I guess we'll move into my thoughts on Ryan Day, big picture in the program, and what you do moving forward if you're Ohio State. So first of all, one thing to note, Ohio State has a new president of the university and a new AD this year. We'll see. I don't know. It's just good to note those sorts of things. I said before the season that it wasn't national championship or bust for Ohio State and Ryan Day. A lot of people were saying that because of the roster and Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith and the money and the NIL and what you have to do. I said it. That doesn't make sense, but it is beat Michigan or bust. And part of that was because of Ohio State's immensely talented team, but also what we knew Michigan was going to be. Michigan wasn't good. You can look at Michigan 2021, 22, and 23. Yes, there are things you can point to on Ohio State's sideline where you go, oh, if you improve those things, you maybe win those games. But you can also tip the hat and go, well, Michigan had a good team and maybe they were just also better. If you want to throw in the Connor Stalions cheating thing, you can do that as well. My point is the Michigan teams from 21, 22, and 23, part of that success, part of those wins for Michigan and losses for Ohio State were Michigan doing things right, Michigan having good players, Michigan having a good team. Michigan this year didn't do anything in this game that you did not expect them to do. This is not credit to Sharon Moore and his staff for coming up with a game plan or something that Ohio State wasn't expecting. Everything played out exactly how you would expect for Michigan. They do not have a quarterback that's capable of throwing a forward pass. They are so one-dimensional. And even then, their running game, their offensive line, is not as good as it has been. Defense is still solid. We talked about that already with the D-line. But you're missing Colston Loveland, your best offensive player, and then your best corner, Will Johnson. And even like that halfback pass or that double pass or whatever that was late in the game, we were all expecting that as well because Michigan historically does that in games like this against Ohio State. But even Joel Klatt was basically begging them to do that all game. Michigan and Sharon Moore did nothing you weren't expecting. The previous 3 years with Michigan, if you want to tip the hat and say you won, you were the better team in general or the better team on the field that day, you could do that. This was just so self-inflicted for Ohio State. It's quite incredible. So back to the Ryan Day thing. His team was not ready to play. His offensive game plan was horrible. Defense was pretty good, not perfect. Gave up some stuff at the end, but there's not a whole lot more I think you can ask out of the defense. Yes, it could have been better. It wasn't perfect, but it was certainly good enough to win. Ryan Day and Ohio State, I think, have to win it all this year for Ryan Day to keep his job. Now, whether or not that happens is one thing, but I don't think something like winning 2 playoff games is good enough for Ryan Day and for Ohio State. Well, I can tell you, for the Ohio State fan base, it's not good enough. A lot of fans are against Ryan Day right now and the staff. And yeah, the fan base can be cruel at times. But also Ryan Day knows what he was getting himself into with Michigan and Ohio State and the rivalry and how that works and how you've lost the last 3 years and you can't lose 4 in a row and how bad Michigan was and how good your team is supposed to be. Winning a national championship sure solves a lot of problems, right? And this is a pretty big problem for Michigan. And yes, you'd have 2 losses and the loss to Michigan would sting, but if you bring home the national championship, the conversation is totally different, and a lot of people look at Ryan Day differently. It's not perfect. He has a Michigan problem, yes. But winning a national championship sure fixes a lot of issues. So I think that's what he has to do. I just don't think winning 1 or 2 playoff games is good enough. Now, let's say they win the first round, lose in the second round. Is it guaranteed he's fired? I don't know, because now you're getting into, well, if you fire someone, you have to hire someone. So who would you replace? So let's get into that here. First phone call I'm making if Ryan Day's fired, or if Ryan Day walks away. Maybe that's a response. Maybe that's a possibility, because Ryan Day did say earlier in the week, last week, that other than his dad committing suicide, losing to Michigan has been the worst thing to happen to him and his family, which is crazy to think about. So he feels the pressure. He understands it. But if Ryan Day walks away or is fired, whatever, and you guys might find this crazy or kind of silly, the first phone call is to Nick Saban. Midwest ties. I understand he's a good thing going on with ESPN and College Game Day. I understand he left coaching because he was just kind of over it and sick of it. And I understand that he probably wouldn't even answer the phone or return the phone call. It doesn't mean you at least don't pick up the phone and try. It's unrealistic, but I think you give Nick Saban a call, even though you know it's not going to happen. Number 2 is Mike Vrabel. Basically, he's Jim Harbaugh of Ohio State, right? He played for Ohio State, went on to the NFL, coached in the NFL. He doesn't have a perfect NFL record, but has had success. He doesn't have a job right now. He's going to get calls, probably from some other NFL teams here soon. And at one point, in the Ohio State media, some of them have come out and said this. At one point, because he coached at Ohio State, he said that his goals were to be a head coach in the NFL and or be the head coach at Ohio State. A lot of fans think he wouldn't come back to Ohio State to coach and to be the head coach, just considering the state of college football. I don't know. There's also some speculation that if it was offered to him, that he would take it. So I don't think we're that far off from a Mike Vrabel-led Ohio State Buckeye football team. And I think that's call number 2, and that's probably the most realistic out of these 3 options, because call number 3, I think, is Dan Lanning. Oregon head coach, young and up and coming. He's got a really good thing going on in Oregon right now. I get that. Could Ohio State win a bidding war against Oregon, Uncle Phil, the Nike money? I don't know. Ohio State has a lot of money, but so does Oregon and Uncle Phil. And Phil Knight is just dishing out money because he wants to see a national championship in his lifetime. And the guy's not getting any younger. Make no doubt about it, Ohio State is a better job than Oregon. It doesn't mean Oregon's a bad job. Oregon's not a bad job. Like, Dan Lanning probably could have had the Alabama job if he wanted it, and he didn't want it. So Oregon's a really good job. I just think Ohio State's probably the best job in the country. I don't know. You'd have to throw him a ton of money. I don't know if you throw him $12 million a year. Might be crazy. I don't know. But if Ryan Day steps away or if Ryan Day is fired, I think those are Saban, Vrabel, Lanning. I mean, I think those are the guys that you call. You know you're not getting Saban. I think it's worth 1 phone call at the very least. You're probably going to focus on getting Vrabel. If you don't get him, you go after Dan Lanning. If you go over 3 on those guys, now you're getting into the Marcus Freemans of the world, Notre Dame. He played at Ohio State. Would he come back to Ohio State to coach? I don't know. It seems like he's happy with what he's doing in Notre Dame right now. People have floated Matt Campbell's name out. He's from Ohio. I don't know about Matt Campbell. There's even been a little bit of scuttlebutt about Urban Meyer coming back. That seems like a stretch. Things kind of get messy. Ohio State would be fine. They would find the right coach. But ultimately, where Ryan Day and where the program is at, they got to bring home a national championship this year. And now it's unrealistic because now we're in the natty or bust. In the preseason, I said it's not natty or bust. Now it's the postseason. I'm saying it is natty or bust. It's unrealistic, but guess what? You lose 4 times in a row to Michigan. You've already had 2 losses this year. Nothing's working. You have what is kind of should be a super team almost. You got to win it all if you're Ryan Day. And this is the time to do it.